Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sustainability in Space. My name is Nishan Degnarain.
And I am Miki Sode.
And today we are delighted to have a very exciting podcast with a very special guest, all the way from Singapore, Jonathan Hung. So let's welcome Jonathan. Jonathan is the head of the Office of Space Technology and Industry in Singapore, otherwise known as the Singapore's National Space Office. And so we're looking forward to having a very unique perspective of a emerging and sophisticated space nation and see what role Singapore can play within that space economy. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you, Nishan, Miki, for having me as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us. So let's start with kind of brief history of the Singapore's involvement into space program, because some of our audience may not be too familiar with it. And also your role and involvement in that history as well. I think that would be enlightening to hear how the OSTIn, the Office for Space Technology and Industry in Singapore, came about in 2013 and where we are headed. So,
okay. No, thank you again for having me on the podcast. I'm truly excited to be able to share both OSTIn's journey, our Singapore National Space Office, a little bit about myself. So I started my career back, almost 2 decades ago already with the Singapore Economic Development Board. Operationally, that's also where OSTIn sits in. I was involved in the early days of setting up a space program office of sorts, and that was 2 decades ago. I've been in many areas in space, covering space and defense in companies, various portfolios among startups, SMEs. I've sat on a few boards of our growth startups here in space as well. And it's always been a passion of mine. And most recently, I served as the executive chairman of our space industry body as well, before coming back to head up the office in November 2023. I serve in a few boards. Space-related ones include our Space Generation Advisory Council, where I sit as an honorary board member. And I also sit on a few committees at the International Astronautical Federation. So a little bit about myself. Now, coming towards where OSTIn, I guess, has taken off from. Our history actually goes back quite some years. We started off several decades ago with our installation of our first satellite ground station back on Sentosa. It's an island off Singapore in 1971. And we also launched our first communication satellite in 1998. So the Office for Space Technology and Industry, or OSTIn for short, began in 2013. Initially focusing on the development of small satellite capabilities. Fast forward to 2020, we were given the mandate to develop Singapore's space industry as Singapore's National Space Office. So our mission is really to develop the next bound of Singapore's space sector, to promote economic growth, advance scientific discovery, and inspire a new generation of innovators. We do so by facilitating the investment of space companies into Singapore, also managing our local national space programs, and also building international relations with partner countries. And that's very, very important for us. OSTIn is also responsible for fostering and enabling regulatory environment for Singapore's space activities and supporting also the development of talent and Singapore's space sector and future workforce.
Well, that's a wide and ambitious set of programs, from setting the regulations, running your own space programs and operations, as well as stimulating the private sector and thinking about the long-term kind of frontier industries and workforce of the future, and capabilities. So it's a very exciting place. I think what's interesting here is that for decades the space race has traditionally been between two large players, right? The United States and Soviet Union and Russia, and then we start to see these emerging nations like the India's, Israel, Japan, European Space Agency emerge. But in recent decades, certainly in the last 20 years, the private space industry has developed, and now we start to see these smaller niche nations, like Singapore, like the UAE. What role do you see as a smaller space nation? I imagine the budget is a fraction of that of NASA or the Chinese Space Agency. What role do you see Singapore playing in that emerging space environment where there are a lot of big players that are out there trying to get space and the prime slots?
So Nishan, that's a very good question. So in Singapore, you talked about we do a lot of things. Small country, we have to do more with less, and make the most of it. So we're certainly very excited about the growth of the global space economy and also the role of all countries, including the small ones like Singapore. And we have to decide and determine where best we can play. Right. So global trends in space are opening up actually new opportunities for talent, companies, and countries like Singapore. We look at it as a positive. We want to expand the ecosystem and also deliver impactful space-related innovations and solutions to the world. So our vision is really to be a credible global player in space, propelling innovation, enriching lives, and also securing a sustainable future for Singapore and the world. Singapore, as you well know, is a leading global hub for businesses and space-adjacent sectors such as aerospace, microelectronics, precision engineering. We have all the ingredients, we believe, I think, to support a sustainable space economy. We don't necessarily have a burgeoning space sector, but certainly the adjacencies help to concretize, I think, our approach to space. So we're well placed to capitalize on this global momentum and growth potential in the space sector. We'll hear about a lot of new space activities. Yeah. We also want to use space technologies to strengthen our position as a hub, as a global hub for aviation, maritime connectivity, and sustainability. And this includes the use of space technologies to enhance communications, connectivity issues, as well as to drive innovation in the green and digital economy. Frequency spectrum is an example of a finite resource that can be carefully used also with tech innovation. We have companies in Singapore such as Trans-Celestial, a Singapore-based telecom service provider, and they create innovative laser communication technologies that will soon be demonstrated in space for in-space inter-satellite link capability. Now, these terminals that they have developed enable faster interference-free data transfer and also significantly improve scalability and bandwidth. Such programs are examples of high-tech innovation married towards also our key thrust in ensuring that we build strong resiliency in connectivity, and that actually enhances our regional connectivity as a whole as well. Now, Singapore is also home to about 70 companies across the value chain, just to give a sense, and about 2,000 or so professionals and researchers. Yeah, and it's a range of companies, both local, domestic companies, as well as foreign companies that we warmly welcome here. Yeah, OSTIn Labs, Planet, Intelsat, a few of these players have called Singapore home, and we have a few established regional installed base players also in country. So this pro-business approach is critical, I think, for us to support and sustain the sector.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds as something that's some of the value system. I know Miki's got some questions about that, but that sounds as if that's what makes Singapore unique. It's not just a government-dominated approach; it's that public-private partnership, and I imagine it's a combination of allowing the private sector to innovate, but also giving a little bit of guidance from what it sounds like, targeted guidance of domains like aviation or maritime or the green sector, through which that you'd like to see certain space innovations.
Absolutely. No, Nishan, it's important that we remain pro-business and open economy. It's not just unique to space. It's actually the entire DNA of our economic strategy, right? We want to welcome everybody, do our best to support them. I mean, again, Singapore may not be the largest market for many of the key sectors that we call home, but certainly I think situated well within the Asia-Pacific region, we can be that hub for them to scale, go global or go regional. Right, and I think that's where the talent plays an important role. Government support is important. As a space office, we support strongly our companies, whether they are local, again, as I mentioned, or locally based foreign companies. Frankly, it doesn't matter. But we do our best to incentivize them and support them to grow out of Singapore.
Yeah, we already touched on this, but how Singapore is a global player, right? But also, with the space program, you lead the Singapore's overall economy too, right? So I would like to dig deep and ask you about what are some core values that's driving Singapore's space program. Okay, what's important for you? Yeah.
No, that's a good question as well. I mean, to be frank, as a responsible but nascent spacefaring country, Singapore is committed to ensuring the peaceful, sustainable, and safe use of space. We believe that space remains a global commons that can be harnessed for the collective benefit of humankind. Yeah? Singapore supports the development of international norms and an open, inclusive, and rules-based international regime. That's very important. Governing space activities to promote responsible behavior in outer space. So collaboration is crucial in ensuring the safe and sustainable use of space for all. We've always been an open economy and society, as I mentioned earlier, and our impact is actually multiplied by all our partnerships, both bilaterally and also multilaterally. We globally convene various platforms, right? We bring together industry experts, investors, researchers, students, national space agencies, and so on and so forth. Anyone interested in having a dialogue with us or with partners around the world, right? And as a hub, I guess we foster these space collaborations across the public-private sector nexus, and we will continue to support them all. Actually, on that note, we also happy to share that we co-hosted 2 workshops with the Secure World Foundation on long-term sustainability in October 2024 and space traffic management just in February 2025. And that also helped to reach out to all our regional friends in the region. Yeah.
And so this is interesting, in an interesting moment in history, right, where there are kind of fracturing multilateral relations. There is that core set of values around collaboration, openness, that awareness, education that's needed. Singapore has played a pivotal role in many other verticals in the global economy, right? As you mentioned, aviation, maritime, finance, in terms of a business and regional business hub. And so, how do you see your role as a space, as a national space agency, national space office, as a regulator? Are there ways that you've influenced the space economy to be more sustainable rather than extractive? To, as you mentioned, kind of look at the rules-based approach. Is that something that Singapore has actively managed, or you found that naturally a lot of space companies have tried to gravitate towards some of the right sort of norms that align with your values?
Well, I mean, Nishan, that's also something that we try to at least innovate or ideate on a day-to-day basis. I mean, we certainly adhere to a rules-based infrastructure, and I think companies here certainly recognize this. It's an evolving process. We don't want to over-regulate. At the same time, we want to make sure that we remain open. Yeah. So it's always this struggle, I think, between the two. But open communication is important with the companies. We work very closely with our space agencies in the region and globally as well. Identify best practices, determine, I guess, what works and what doesn't. We also try our best to crystal ball into the future to see where are areas that we can place our bets in. So these areas, I think, are things that we truly study and try our very best to be a home for talent, for innovation, for all our companies and organizations that want to work with us. As a regulator, or I guess as a national space organization in country, we are responsible for the growth of the sector, and be it whether it is in G2G or in B2B sectors. I mean, all these to us is very important as they make up the whole core foundation of what makes Singapore work. For space in particular, it's again we don't have a burgeoning domestic sector, but we play to our strengths. We talk about aerospace, maritime connectivity. These are things that, again, space technologies have many applications to, right? So not only do we want to attract them here, we certainly don't want to just be a base infrastructure play for everybody, but there has to be some degree of economic spin-off that they can gain, minimally prototype, test bed new ideas, and bring that to the world, right? So in these areas and buckets that we have identified that they can play in, these are the core thrusts within our space, next bound of space developments in Singapore. Right, and over the next 5 to 10 years, we believe that bringing all this to bear, there will be a clear commercial case actually for the companies to see value in being here, and hopefully we can help to scrub and be a sounding board for their business plans, right? Because if they can make it here and make it in region, then I suspect they will be able to globalize fairly easily as well.
So that's an interesting perspective. So Singapore, really being a springboard for space-based companies, I guess regionally in ASEAN region of Southeast Asia, but then also globally as well. So that creates an interesting kind of framing device, because such a diverse and emergent kind of use of these space technologies. How do you think about some of the risks that may exist within space? Because as you mentioned in some of your comments at the outset, space has to be open and accessible for all nations, right? Emerging space nations as well as those who are operating. And we have different value sets of nations that are operating in space. Some who may want to look at other applications, more military-based applications. Others are more peaceful and commercial applications. But it just takes a few bad actors, if you like, to damage the sustainability of space. And we've seen that on the terrestrial front when we look at the use of our oceans, or the Arctic versus Antarctica, or how biodiversity is governed, for example. The current space frameworks are based on UN treaties that have been around for maybe half a century before a lot of development have been in place, and there are these new emerging accords that have been signed. Do you feel that for the next 5 years, 10 years, as a space agency, you are looking at these decadal long time horizons? Do you feel that we have the right governance structures to prepare us for the next decade of where the space industry is heading? Or is there a need for either new governance and new capabilities to think about how we govern the norms and awareness of where the space sector needs to head?
Okay, so Nishan, maybe I start off by sharing that first and foremost, I think Singapore actively participates in various multilateral fora, such as the United Nations Committee on Outer Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, UN COPIUS, the Artemis Accords meetings, as well as the World Radio Communications Conference, WRC, organized by the UN's International Telecommunications Union, ITU. So regionally, we actively engage in platforms such as the ASEAN Subcommittee on Space Technology and Applications, or SCOSA, and the Asia Pacific Regional Space Agency Forum, or APRSAF for short. Singapore joined the COPIUS in 2019, and SCOSA also seeks to formulate the framework for enhancing collaboration in space technology and applications. Now, all these platforms are critical. We host some of these sessions and convene them. For example, we hosted the 33rd meeting of the ASEAN SCOSA in 2024, just last year. It was an important platform because we helped to actually bring together the region, and also brought them overseas to the International Astronautical Congress right after. So we signed the Artemis Accords in 2022 as the 18th signatory, and we believe that the Accords provides a useful framework for guiding cooperation on space exploration, right, to ensure its conduct in a safe, sustainable, and transparent manner. Right. Singapore supports the voluntary implementation of the guidelines on the long-term sustainability of outer space, or the LTS guidelines. Right. Support of the international community is important to preserve the long-term sustainability of space for emerging spacefarers and small states. This last part also is important because we fall within that bucket, and we have to ensure that I think that common norms is preserved. Right? Space is a global resource and really doesn't just belong to only the bigger players. It's also important for the voices of small countries and emerging spacefaring nations to be heard, and their rights also to be preserved. So actually, collective space governance is crucial, right? Amongst all the existing fora, right? As more players, more public-private, players emerge, and these important dialogues do have to take place. I think most importantly, these conversations at this fora is critical, where everybody, I guess, has a chance to be heard. Perspectives are heard and heeded, right? And these institutional frameworks will certainly adapt and certainly also evolve over time.
Yeah, well, I can see it's very powerful for nations like Singapore, which aren't as large as perhaps the US or China, with differing kind of value stakes, to come in and be this convening or this hosting or this neutral platforms to have these discussions. Because when we start to see all the trends such as exponential technological trends, the role of artificial intelligence and advanced robotics and propulsion systems that will allow us to do more with space, the emergence of a range of private sector actors, those that are government backed from certain nations, others which are more private sector entrepreneurial from other nations, possibly even more high risk from other nations, and then the rise of new emergent spacefaring nations. Several years ago, we would not have imagined that there would be probes and others from nations like the UAE or Saudi, Singapore, certainly there, Rwanda, Nigeria. A lot of other nations are now looking at space as that domain which is essential for their economies and their political economy to also progress. And so with that, it sounds as if there is a need for evolution, there is a need for hosting or building these capabilities, and it's actually a unique position that a nation like Singapore could take, especially with its value set around openness and collaboration, and the bridge between some of the kind of larger nations that might be there.
No, Nishan, it's a fair point. I just thought I also add that one of the, I guess, advantages of being a small nation is one thing, but also to some degree we are newer to some of these international fora. We want to actively contribute, and we try to bring some capabilities to bear as well, or at least a different school of thought. Policy perspectives are important, and we certainly are aligned with our partners and our member states on key policies across, for example, LTS, various other sustainability guidelines and support infrastructure that all countries should support in general. But to substantiate some of our positions as well, or at least to bring to bear some of these capabilities we talked about, one thing we're doing more of is also doing more technical exchanges, right? So although, a lot of these traditional platforms have been very policy centric, I see a lot more technical exchanges happening on the sidelines, right? In fact, more and more so that sometimes they become more frontline conversations. Singapore is home to a lot of technical research and talent. Our institutes of higher learning and research institutes are not bad, and I think they do have a decent showing across the world. And this is something that we try to advocate. We bring up our technical experts to these platforms so that they also can provide perspectives. It's important that these capabilities and technologies are well understood, right? And I think that is a base, again, for people to develop new ideas and perspectives. And through our initiatives, such as we launched 1.5 months ago, our Earth Observation Initiative, brings together a community of Earth observation players, partners, non-governmental organizations, or basically any organization that has challenges that space satellite technology can solve. Bring this community together and solve real-world problems. So this whole initiative, with our founding, 15 members and partners, we are proliferating and sharing that, hey, if you need downstream applications or analysis of satellite data for a whole range of needs, from disaster management to disease monitoring, food security, food resiliency, or climate watch, if our research institutes have those capabilities and an analysis already done, we're happy to share that and bring that to bear, deploy our assets to support countries, in particular within maybe the equatorial belt first, because that's where we are, and also the larger Asia Pacific region. So things like that are examples of capabilities or initiatives that we would like to wholeheartedly share with the community, again, so that we can bridge the gap, between actual understanding of what can be done and delivered, together with closing the gap with policy decisions.
That's fascinating, because it is this unique kind of time in the world right now. Now you talk about whether it's access to open source protocols or models or data sets, as well as the need for trust as well in what those data sets are. But that importance of soft levers is something that we're hearing more and more about. It's not just about the hard influence of regulation that's there, but the technical exchange, the educational exchange, the awareness that you could have these free-flowing dialogues between private sector operators. Now, that's not around collusion, but it's about technical, sharing, education, awareness exchanges, and particularly at a time where we're seeing this kind of fragmentation, the defunding of certain Earth observation institutes from NASA, which had some of the largest budgets. It does create new opportunities for emergent space nations to step in, develop capabilities along the entire value chain, from observation to modeling to end use applications like insurance, for example, that could actually fare well for nations like Singapore to step in and expand their space economies.
No, certainly. I think these are areas and adjacencies, as you mentioned, that are critical. I mean, Singapore is also a finance hub. We want to make sure that we play to our strengths, as I mentioned earlier. Securing that sector also to some degree requires space technologies. I'll give you an example. I mean, secured communications is a mainstay, and we have to think a little further as well. We have companies that play in the quantum key distribution space, securing next generation communications via quantum technologies. Right. So one of our local companies, Spectral, actually is developing those quantum payloads, and they themselves, work together with our banks, our authorities within the finance sector, and not just within Singapore, cross-border, because it really is cross-border, intercontinental transactions that will require security in the future. And this then applies to any kind of sensitive data that I guess, data privacy is going to be the heart and soul of what we discuss, I guess, in the next decade or so. And those intercontinental platforms, right, require satellite technologies, right? So these are things that we try and build ground up. We know there's a market need, end of the day, and we try our very best to encourage such advances, even though at an early stage. And this requires, again, heavy lifting from the government from day one. We're prepared to support this. The National Space Office actually disperses funds through our Space Technology and Development Program fund. It's an STDP fund. It's an R&D fund that goes to our companies and also to our institutes of higher learning for next generation capabilities. We announced, again, just recently, earlier this year, a top-up of 60 million Singapore dollars, and that adds on to the earlier $150 million that we pumped into our sector for R&D over the last 5 years or so. These things are areas that we bet in, and we ensure that our public-private sector partnerships not just do work within domestic Singapore, but we highly encourage them to also find like-minded partners overseas, right? Bridges that we have, OSTIn has actually driven and partnered. We have countries that we have MOUs with their space agency counterparts. Actually, that's quite a diverse field. And we certainly encourage both researchers, industry, and all partners around them to support these efforts.
Before wrap up, I have a question. Earlier, you mentioned about your involvement to SGAC as well as enforcing and encouraging the future workforce is one of the important component or the tenet of OSTIn. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, capacity building is important. It stretches across the whole realm. It depends on who you ask. Some people say it's university-led. Some goes all the way down to our preschoolers. But certainly we look at the universities, at least the tertiary institutions first. We try to support all kinds of innovation that they're proposing to us. Many wild ideas, but we encourage them all. We have universities today and even high schools that have launched satellites. Those things are ready, I think, to us, the early stages of building up that talent pipeline. We try to go earlier as well. Outreach is important. But most importantly, I think we want to drive awareness and allow a lot of our young students access to industry. We have a vibrant startup ecosystem, which also helps. To be quite honest, the kids today don't listen to me. They listen to the startup founders and tech founders that are very excited about space, and actually they are the best to evangelize it. We do encourage those activities, and I think it's important that, again, as a national organization and National Space Office, we provide not just real-world problems for them to solve, but programs for them to be part of. And these programs are not just space programs, right? We want them to understand that space cuts across all the adjacencies that we spoke about. And this is something that we bring to the table and expose our younger generation to, right? That space actually is cross-cutting, diffuses into a range of industries. So, there are good jobs, in the space domain, and we encourage everybody to strive for it. So these are things that we do encourage on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and I could tell that how we talked about adjacency too, but like from activities like that from even high school or earlier, young aspiring students could feel that there is a role for them to play in the future space, and then that is encouraging for them to participate more, study more, and then make a contribution to not only to Singapore's space program, but to the global economy as well. So
that's right. No, Miki, you're right. We don't focus just on, well, to be honest, there's no pure space engineer. A lot of our satellite engineers come from, a mixed bag of engineering, right? I mean, electronics, mechanical, systems engineers, so it's across the board. The sciences, and a space program requires, the best in many fields. You need good communicators, you need policy, legal experts, you need medical professionals. So actually, to us, we see space as really a pinnacle, right, of success for a lot of these young students and, again, the talent pipeline. if they can certainly achieve what they're doing in their domains, we warmly welcome them to contribute in the space sector. For the technical guys, I think being in STEM is important. It again supports our whole STEM foundation in Singapore that allows that technical innovation expertise to be born out of and supporting again our global economy. But whatever they're doing, I think it's important for us to encourage. And as we have seen, the space programs, especially the larger complex partnerships that we want to be part of, international programs, require people from all walks of life. Yeah, so this is something that we want to encourage, so that we get the best options, I guess, that we can provide again for our next generation of budding scientists, engineers, space entrepreneurs.
Super.
Excellent. I mean, Jonathan, I feel we could go on forever. We've come to the end of our time, but this has been a fascinating discussion, a fascinating insight to how Singapore thinks about its space economy. I mean, we've covered topics from the importance of partnership, the role of government, which is particularly unique in Singapore, that public-private partnership, which is very special. Think about the value system, about rules-based order, the importance of the private sector, the peaceful use of space, and the various accords that Singapore has signed, which is important. And it shows an orderly development of the space economy is something which is crucial for Singapore, but also thinking internationally as well. And it's great to see your mind traveling internationally. You touched on the sophistication of the programs and what the National Space Office does in terms of setting the right R&D program, investing in R&D, but thinking about the adjacencies with other sectors like finance and providing that guided influence to some of the early stage startups in the space economy, which is important as well to look at, the agency with maritime, aviation, finance, for example. And at the end, you talked about the importance of a long-term workforce. And you said, well, there's no one particular degree that will lead you into a space entrepreneurship role. And so it really is the pinnacle of talent and skills to get there. And I think what we've heard from you today, Jonathan, is almost like a pinnacle of space and government coming together, and your experience working with industry and sophisticated policymaking to get to this level of a very sophisticated, very enlightened space agency. So I think there's a lot more that we could explore, but unfortunately for today's podcast, we've run out of time. So with that, we'd just like to say thank you, Jonathan, for joining us on today's podcast.
Thank you so much.
Nishan. Thank you, Miki. Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.